Hello again. Welcome to Victor George Leather Goods YouTube Knife Sheath School Volume 2. If you've ever wanted to build yourself a compression pouch sheath, taco sheath, fold-over sheath, whatever they're called today, with a dangler option, then this video is for you. I'm going to take you through the complete process of building one of these yourself, from the pattern to the fabrication steps necessary to make this happen. There's some unique features on this particular video that I'm confident that will help you make something to this level. It not only includes a holster style patch for rigidity and decoration applications, but it also has a very unique stop welt to keep the knife from going down into the sheath. I'm going to show you how to draw this pattern. I'm going to show you how to make this. So let's do it. So my pattern process for this style of knife and a compression pouch sheath is like this. So I start with a legal size manila file folder, and I draw the actual center line, the crease line for my visual benefit, and then I add another line 3/8 of an inch from that, and that is where I lay the knife down, right up against that 3/8 inch line, and trace the knife as good as you can to get a true representation of the knife and blade. All right, once I do that, then what I will do is give myself a symmetry line, and this symmetry line will be the top of my sheath. So I like a 2.5 finger grasp of the knife in the sheath. So I'm going to do my symmetry line probably right in this area here for that 2-finger grasp. Keep all my symmetry lines together, and I'm just going to draw a line out to here. Once I have my sheath height established, I'm going to do a 1/2 inch welt up along the blade. And there's a couple of steps here that you might have to pay close attention to. It'll make sense as the pattern gets developed. So from the tip of the knife, I'm going to take a 1/2 inch welt. And again, this is how I do it. So keeping my symmetry lines straight, I'm going to just start doing my 1/2 inch seam allowance. And again, that shadow line helps me here in a little bit to eventually cut out the sheath. Now, where this part goes in a little bit, I just want a straight line. Just below the guard, somewhere in that area. That's enough for me. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take from the end of the guard, I'm going to do about a 45-degree line from the welt line up here. And then from the end of the guard as well, I'm going to go a 1/2 inch and keep my symmetry lines correct. And I'm going to come up here, up to the top of the sheath face. All right, so now what I need to do is I need to establish the welt a little bit more. And from the end of the guard up to the top, actually a 1/2 inch from that outside line will give me that. I draw that up to the top. Okay, now my welt is slowly starting to emerge, and what I'm going to do now is take French curve or whatever you'd like, and I'm going to go just below the guard to the blade, and I'm going to give myself something to that effect. From the very tip of the blade to my first line, I'm going to draw straight down. From this side over, this is going to be the drain hole right there. All right, so now I need to take a little artistic leave and connect these lines together. So what I'm going to do here, freehand, you can use a French curve. I'm just going to come up here, and that's why I use an eraser with a pencil, because you do this until it looks good to you. Okay, nice soft little curve there. That'll work for me. Now I need to establish the shape of the top of the sheath. And this can be anything you want. It could be with a little bit of a curvature flare here, or it can just be, as in this particular sheath here, just a nice smooth line. We'll do that for ease of demonstration. So from the center line, I'm going to come and I'm just going to do a slight gradual curve like that. I'm satisfied with that for this particular sheath. And now I have my sheath body. As you can see here on this particular model here, all of this here is my stop welt. All right, so now that we have that, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a knife, and from the center line, we're gonna cut up. Right at that folder crease line, we're gonna do the same thing on the bottom. Now I'm gonna cut out my sheath face. And it's nothing more than from the center line. Out. And that fog line gives me a good view of my line. And I come down here, turn this around a little bit from the center line. And we'll save that for another pattern. Now we have our sheath face. We're just going to fold that in like that. That's not a good thing. All right, now we have our sheath body. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take where I cut here. That's going to be where my D-ring backstrap is going to be. So I have a 1 1/4 inch inside diameter D-ring that I'm going to use for the Dangler sheath, and I have a ruler that is 1 1/4 inches, which makes it a lot easier. So from this line here that we cut, I'm going to draw a 1/2 inch line, and from experience in other builds, that 1/2 inch line is what I like. So I'm going to draw that in. And then I'm going to take my 1 1/4 inch ruler. This is establishing the back strap, and I'm going to lay it on that line. And I'm going to take a quick pause and sharpen my pencil. And go ahead and draw my back strap here to the sheath itself. All right, so that's going to establish my back strap or my Dangler strap option. And all I'm going to do now is take a little bit more artistic freedom, and I'm just going to give myself a soft transition. Get that out of the way. A little soft transition here. You can use a French curve. You can use anything you want. I'm just going to flow that in, and I'm going to flow this in. All right. Now we have that. Now what we need to determine is the fold back. So I'm going to set the knife in there, and I kind of want to have the fold back just a little bit below the top of the handle. So I'm going to go just below that thong hole. I'm going to give myself a little bit of a line, and using my symmetry lines here, I'm going to indicate my fold back. All right, now I want about a 3.5 inch distance here for the turn back. And this is something that is optional for you. You can do 4, you can do less. But anyway, from the fold line, I'm going to do about a 3.5 inch line to about the center of the body, somewhere in there. And what that's doing is it's going to tell me where this back strap is going to eventually seat. So I do that. So that was 3.5 inches, and I'm going to do 3 3/4 inches on this side of that line, and that's going to give me the top end of my sheath. So that's where that's going to be. Again, symmetry lines. Now what I want to do is I'm going to use this the curvature of this D-ring here, and you'll see how that comes to play later. So I'm going to set that down there like that. Make sure it's as true as I can get it. All right, so that is it. Now we have our sheath. So another option for the patch style sheath is I'm going to include that. Again, that gives me rigidity and a place for an inlay or geometric stamping. And the way I do that is freehand, and I'll come from this 3/8 inch line and from the welt line, and I will just do a soft curve like that. That is my patch. All right, that is optional. All right, so now what we're gonna do is off camera, I'm gonna cut this sheath pattern out. So we've cut the pattern out from our file folder, and I folded it into itself. I've laid the knife down onto the pattern itself to get an idea of symmetry. So the back strap is right along the path of the handle, which looks good to me. I'm going to then take the knife, and I know that this is a paper pattern, but it's still going to give me an idea of, did I cut enough for my 2-finger grasp from the sheath, and I'm satisfied with that. And also the integral loop, when it's folded, it is in line with the sheath, perfectly symmetrical, exactly what we're looking for. And I think everything's going to work, and we're pretty close to cutting this to leather, and then the process will be a little bit quicker. Just remember that the pattern is the most important part of this whole build, and the actual fabrication, in my opinion, is a lot easier. Okay, so we are now ready to do that. And another option, so for example, the patch, I like the patch because it replicates the look of a holster. The patch also gives you some place for geometric stamping, dragon scale, or an inlay of any shape, color, or size that you'd like. Options are aplenty, or completely without the patch. If you don't want an integral loop, all you have to do is cut the pattern from the top like this, and then you add an external loop on the back, again with or without the patch, and then you just have your basic pouch sheath. All right, so everything's ready to go. I'm satisfied. Let's go ahead and cut this to leather and begin this build. All right, we have cut the pattern 2 leather, 8 to 10 ounce, good firm temper stock. I'll be honest with you, this is a mock-up build that I'm doing specifically for the video. So the leather is of a little bit lower grade. Use the best that you can afford. The better the leather, the easier all these steps are. So we've taken the main pattern piece that we have made, and I laid it onto the grain side of the leather in this orientation for a right-hand strong sheath. Obviously, you would reverse it for a lefty. Once I did that, then we cut out the pieces of the pattern. So if you're going to use the patch, you would cut that out. And of course, cut out your patch leather from the same weight. I then cut out the welt stop piece, and that is cut out as well from a piece of leather. I did clip the corner here at the top, and I left a little excess on the back side of the welt so that I can trim it once we get to the gluing stage. And I cut a 1 1/8 inch strap for the dangler. This is about 12 inches. We'll need almost all of that. But all of these pieces were cut from about 1.5 feet of leather. So that's beneficial for the ultimate cost. And let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what we're going to do now. I've taken the main body and I took the pattern piece of the welt and I laid it on the front of the face. I'll show you why that's important later. And I just took a pencil and I marked the inside of the stop welt so that I can see eventually where I'm going to need to put my stitches. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I also sanded the edges, any rough cuts that I wanted to clean up. I did a little sanding. And then also, if you're going to use the patch, you wouldn't edge this part here, but everything else you would edge both sides, especially on this single ply sheath, and get ready to do your edge work here where we won't be able to get to it later. I also took my welt pattern piece and I laid it on both sides of the sheath. This eventually will be our glue line for the ultimate fold over, and this will be where our welt will eventually sit on the front of the sheath pocket like that. Okay, so these are the preliminary steps that that you would take. Of course, you would edge the entire strap, both sides, in preparation for that, and you will sand and edge and burnish these two sides here. This top piece here, if you're going to use it, will be glued and sewn on later. And then all of these edges will be trued up. So I'm going to go ahead and do all those steps off camera, and then we'll come back. Let's catch up now on what I did off camera. So I went ahead and sewed the patch onto the sheath based on the location of my initial pattern. I went ahead and sewed that by hand, and I used a 5mm pricking iron, which is about 6 stitches per inch. I went ahead also, since it's plain, there's something that we can do to make it a little bit more decorative, and all we need is a pair of wing dividers. And we do our crease line in between the stitches, or on each end of the stitches. And then if you have a single edge creaser or a inexpensive bone folder creaser, you can just burnish the inside of those lines, and it gives it a nice effect. So it doesn't always have to be just boring plain. All right, I also did all these edges. I burnished them. I sanded the top flush, and then dyed and edged everything that I'm not going to be able to get to later on. So that's where we are now. I also went ahead and measured out the strap that we're going to need for the dangler option, and it's 11 3/4 inches. This one is 1 1/8 inches wide, and it's the same 8-ounce stock. All right, so we'll prep that in a future clip for the final dangler. All right, if you'll remember correctly, we went ahead and scribed using our paper pattern earlier to where our stitch lines are going to be. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and establish the double row of stitch lines. And like I did in this particular sheath here, and here I noticed on my footage earlier you really couldn't see the drain hole, but that's where the drain hole develops from this pattern. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my wing dividers and I'm going to come to the outside edge, and I'm going to go in about 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to go right to the end of the welt there, and I'm going to follow that around. Come up pretty close to the top, and then that is established. Now we need to do the second row of stitching, and remember that this is the welt location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come probably right about in this general area, and I'm going to run the wing dividers from there to about right there. We obviously can't follow that curve. And then I'm going to come to the top here, and I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm going to establish my stitch line. Now from here to here, we're going to have to do it by hand. So you don't necessarily want to come here and then do a 90-degree turn and another 90-degree turn. They can be actually like this, a very soft curvature, or on this particular sheath, a little bit more aggressive at the curve. It's not going to be a problem because this welt is going to be contact cemented. I had an old one here that I show how I do this by hand, but all I do is I take a modeling tool or a stylus, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to freehand this line, and I'm going to come up here the same distance, and when I get close to that corner, I'm going to swing it around like this. Okay, and that's going to give me my stitch line indicator. The edge of the welt is going to be right there. I'll show you that in the next clip. I'm going to go ahead and just tap the holes. I'll probably do like I did on this one here. On the outside stitch line, I did a 5mm or 6 stitches to the inch. And on the inside, I did a 4mm, which is about 7 stitches to the inch. If you're going to sew this by machine, or if I was going to sew this by machine, I would use a 277 top thread and a 207 bottom thread or bobbin thread. My hand stitching, you can use Ritza, you can use braided. 1.0 is a great size for this weight of sheath. Okay, so also from my pattern, I indicated where my fold line was going to be based on the pattern itself, and I marked it, and because I'm OCD, I do everything at correct angles. All right, so now what I'm going to do off camera is I'm going to go ahead and use my 4mm stitch line on this and 5mm stitch pricking iron on that. I'll show you that, and then all we're going to have to do then is glue this welt onto that. And remember, we went ahead and pre-marked our areas for that. So let me do that off camera real quick, and we'll be right back. I went ahead and marked my stitch lines with a 4mm and 5mm pricking iron. And I like to do that as a decorative effect also. So it looks nice, and that's the only reason I actually did that. So I went ahead and scratched the inside welt that's going to be glued on. I also dyed the clipped corner and about halfway down, because you can look into the sheath and see that it's dyed and finished. It's just a little detail step. So now I'm ready to work on the Dangler D-ring. If you're not going to use the Dangler, then obviously this step is not necessary. So I'm going to set that on there like that, and it's nice and full, fills that D-ring up very nicely. And I'm going to make sure that it's in a good perpendicular line. Now what I'm going to do, and the reason that we marked this arc with the D-ring itself is because when it's not used with a Dangler, I want this to be able to basically sit right there. Then it won't affect the belt loop itself. And then if the person needs to use the Dangler, he would just lift this up and slide it up to the top. Now you do have an option if you want to, that can be sewn across there, like I did on this one. I don't necessarily find that it's always necessary to do that. As a matter of fact, I kind of like leaving the belt loop like that. So I'm going to go ahead and identify where I need to sew up to. And based on this D-ring, I think I'm going to sew right there to right there somewhere, and then it's just going to be the bottom. There's going to be a little bit of stress, so we don't sew across. Anytime you have a stress area you don't want to sew across, it sort of acts like a perforated stamp. Eventually that's going to weaken and give. All right, so off camera, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch the back strap down. I'm going to go ahead and I've already roughened up all the areas that I need to glue, and I'm going to glue this together. And then I'm going to trim the excess. And I'm going based on the pattern that I've made so far, so I'm confident that it will fit. But let me go ahead and stick this in here and then just sort of give me an idea of how we're looking. Okay, and I'm going to sandwich that together, and as the leather is pressed together, it pushes that half guard right into the correct position that I'm going to need. And I'll show you something once I get the welt glued on there. And I think we are all systems go based on this pattern. All right, I'll be right back. The glue is drying for the welt. I went ahead and started on my Dangler strap. So what I did is I folded up the very bottom, and I put a Chicago screw at a location where that D-ring will easily fit so that it has a swivel effect. Then I measured for two 24-line snaps. I cut them out in the top strap, and I laid it over, and then I took a pen and marked where the corresponding holes will go. The extra length here covers up that Chicago screw so that when the knife is in the sheath, it won't rub up against that metal. So anyway, we'll put the snaps in here in just a minute, and that's all there is to it. You can make this size specific to a belt. You just have to do the math to make that happen. So I went ahead and sewed the back strap on, and if you'll notice what I did is I sewed it around the bottom, and when I came up here, instead of coming across, which you don't want to do on a high stress area, if you're going to do it up here, there's really not a lot of stress, but I just back tacked at an angle in towards the bottom. That's basically bomb proof. You can put your maker's marks in there. You can do whatever you would like. Now, the purpose of that arc there again is so if the consumer is not going to carry this as a Dangler one time, this can just slide down to the bottom and then ride right there. It won't be felt. It won't get in the way. And then when the user wants to use his Dangler system, that'll give him a 2-carry option, high and tight or Dangler. All right, so I went ahead and glued in preparation for the welt, and I did 2 coats of contact cement. You really want this to bond, plus the stitches, but you really want it to bond, so 2 coats of contact cement will make that happen. So now this is an 8-ounce thick welt. After I get it glued in there and trimmed, I'm going to put the knife in there and see if I need to add an additional layer or if I need to skive any portion of this. All right, so all we're going to do now is we're going to match the lines with the sheath. And everything has been drawn to our pattern. So far, so good. And now we are set. Looks good on that side. And I'm going to go ahead and tap that glued area down a little bit. Give it some good contact. And I also do that after you stitch, whether you use a sewing machine or whether you do it by hand. You always want to tack down your stitches. The best way to do that is on a piece of thick glass or a marble, and that will set your stitches. If you want to groove your own stitches in the back, you're welcome to do that. I have found that with the strong thread of today, you can pull it so snug that it goes just at below surface level, and then when you tap it down with a convex hammer, never have a problem. I've never had a problem. Okay, so that is all set. We're going to let that cure just a little bit. I'm going to trim it off, and then I'm going to fold the sheath together and prepare for final sewing of the seam. So I wanted to talk a little bit about welt thickness. Now, it actually is where science and experience come together. The goal is for that knife to be a medium to hard draw initially. With time, it'll loosen up ever so slightly for a medium draw and reholster. So what I do to check the welt is I clamp it together, and the knife fits in just fine where the stop welt comes. It stops the knife. There's enough handle material sticking out, and I'm satisfied with the thickness. Now, once I sew that down, that's really going to compress together. It's going to give me about, I don't know, maybe a full 1/4 inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch thick welt. But anyway, if I had a thicker welt and I did this step and that knife wouldn't be there, if there wasn't any resistance there, I would have to trim that welt down. And the way I would do that before I would do the final glue up is I would take a safety skive and I would skive this one's fine. So I would taper that welt down a little bit, and I'd do that a few times. I wouldn't mess too much with up here because it was just fine. But because the blade is so thin, you can skive that a little bit. And then once you skive it down a little bit, put the knife back together like that. And if you're satisfied with the fit, then it's time to rough up the edges here. Double contact cement on both sides, and you're going to match that up perfectly. If you cut your leather specifically or exactly the way your pattern is, you'll have a flush edge that won't take too much cleanup once we're done. So that's what I'm going to do now. I am going to double contact cement the welt and the other side and stick it together and sew it, and I will be right back. All right, it's all done. We went ahead and glued the seams together, sewed them, sanded the edges to about 800 grit, edged it, and dyed and burnished it. So it is done. I am confident that if you follow the steps, as unorthodox as they might seem to you, that you would be able to build one of these yourself. Have fun with this, enjoy the process, and thanks for coming along for the ride. Class dismissed. I hope you gained something from this. I'm going to continue to do these as I get an opportunity, and I hope you enjoy it. Subscribe, share, and let everybody know that they can see this for themselves. So thank you very much.
Good teacher. He really seems to care. About what, I have no idea.